Welcome to Nero Wolfe's world, where orchids bloom and secrets unfold. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Archie will keep score, Wolfe won't admit he cares. Subscribe for more classic Nero Wolfe mysteries. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the call. Wolfe answered himself. If you'd told me that Nero Wolfe would one day answer his own telephone, I'd have put you down as a man with a taste for fairy tales or padded cells. But at 9:30 on a wet Wednesday in November, the impossible happened. History dialed our number and Wolfe picked up. I was upstairs at the time, fighting a losing battle with a collar that had ideas above its station. Through the half-open door I heard the ring slice through the house like an accusation. It wasn't the polite tinkle for visitors, it was the sharp, impatient buzz of the office line. Our purveyor was sending something French and sinful for dinner, and Fritz was in the kitchen planning its fate, and Theodore was with the orchids. Wolfe, alone on the ground floor, lumbered into the hall. When I came down a minute later, he was standing there with the receiver in his hand, eyes narrowed at the instrument as though it had personally insulted him. His forefinger rested on the cradle, but he hadn't yet replaced the phone, and the expression on his face could have curdled brandy. "Good morning," I said. "Practicing to join the human race?" He didn't move his eyes from the receiver. Pfui, the call was idiotic. "That's the best kind, saves time." He turned toward the office, the telephone dangling from his fingers like a dead snake. A voice said, "Tell him it's begun again," and disconnected. "Who's him?" I asked, following him inside. "Me," Wolfe said. He sat heavily behind the desk, where the yellow lamplight pooled across the leather blotter. The rain outside rattled against the glass, impatient to get in. The tone was masculine, middle-aged, educated, and entirely insufferable. I perched on the corner of the desk. Could have been a crank, or a wrong number, or someone reminding you the souffle of life has risen again. He glared at me, which coming from Wolfe is equal to a full-dress explosion. "Archie, you are a jackanapes. When a man utters nonsense, he intends meaning by it." Then maybe meaning wanted privacy. That earned me a sigh deep enough to start a breeze. He pressed the bell cord for Fritz by reflex, and then remembered Fritz would ignore it during source hour, muttering something about civilization's decay. For the next 20 minutes, the brownstone was as quiet as a monastery with a hangover. Wolfe sat motionless, thumbs pressed together under his chin, eyes half closed. At 1 o'clock he'd have been demanding lunch. At 9:30 he brooded. I typed up notes from last week's case, half hoping the phone would ring again so I could see him flinch. It did, at 10:15, but this time I was closer. I picked it up. "Goodwin speaking." "This Inspector Kramer," the voice growled. "Tell Wolfe to stay put. He's about to hear from me officially." "Inspector, he stays put if the building collapses." "Yeah? Then he'll have company. Tell him Arlen Maddox, attorney at law, is dead. Poisoned. And somebody at that address was the last number he called." I said I'd pass it along, hung up, and turned to Wolfe. He was already watching me, expression unreadable. "Who was it?" "Kramer. Says an attorney named Maddox died after making a social call to us. Poison." Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "I know the name. Estate law, Midtown offices, 5 partners. I read his obituary yesterday morning, metaphorically." "Then he's ahead of his schedule." He drew a breath that lifted the bulk of him like a tide. "Archie, we are invited, albeit rudely, to participate in foolishness. Attend to it. Go to the scene. Report. Take the heron." "You sure? The police might not love me dropping in unannounced." Inspector Kramer will contain his emotions. When Wolfe talks that way, there's nothing to do but get my hat. By 10:40 I was out in the rain, steering the Heron coupe through Manhattan's early traffic. West 35th looked like a row of drenched dominoes, and the wipers were earning their pay. I reached Maddox's office building near Bryant Park, a 12-story cube of stone with all the charm of a ledger. Uniforms were stationed at the door. I showed my license and dropped Kramer's name with the tenderness of a man tossing a grenade. Inside, the lobby smelled of damp wool and disinfectant. Upstairs, Maddox's office was a hive gone silent, typewriters idle, secretaries whispering. The lawyer himself was behind a desk big enough for a small dance floor. He was 40-odd, clean-shaven, grey at the temples, and very dead. The coffee cup on the blotter still steamed faintly. Kramer stood by the window, cigar pointing at the rain. His overcoat looked slept in, his temper the same. "Goodwin," he said, not thrilled. "I should have known." "Inspector, I bring sunshine wherever I go." "You bring Wolfe's nose, what's he want?" To know why a man he never met called him to announce something had begun again. I don't suppose Maddox left a note explaining. He grunted. "No note, just the call record." He gestured to the desk phone. "Private line, last number dialed, your boss's, 2 minutes before he keeled over." "That's efficient dying," I said. "Save the comedy. Coroner says alkaloid poison, probably in the coffee. Secretary found him." "Where is she?" "Home. Shock." Kramer bit down on the cigar like it was personal. "You tell Wolfe he's not under suspicion yet. But if that call means he was mixed up in this. Inspector, if Wolfe ever mixes anything, it's beer and scorn. He doesn't poison attorneys. He out-argues them." That earned me a grunt, approximating amusement. He turned to Pearlie Stebbins, who was poring through desk drawers with the delicacy of a gorilla. "Find anything?" "Just legal junk. Wills, trusts, something called Project Lantern. Sounds like army stuff." Kramer frowned. "Get that to the lab." I leaned closer to the phone. The receiver was still warm, faintly humming with the ghost of connection. A single sheet of blotting paper lay beneath it, bearing the faint imprint. "Tell him begun," truncated. The caller's line to Wolfe had been, "Tell him it's begun again." I pocketed a mental photograph and straightened. "Inspector, may I borrow a look at the call log? Strictly for academic curiosity." "You can look, no touching." The slip showed our number, clear as print, time-stamped 9:28. I whistled softly. That's when Wolfe answered. Kramer's head jerked. "Answered?" "Personally. Historic occasion. He might expect a medal." "Tell him I'll send flowers." Back at the brownstone, the air smelled of coffee, orchids, and mystery. Wolfe sat where I'd left him, glowering at a volume of Plutarch as though ancient Greece had offended him. "You're wet," he said. "Rain does that." I peeled off my coat. Maddox is as dead as tax law, poisoned in his office. Kramer sends love. He closed the book with a clap. "Report." I gave him the rundown, the warm phone, the blotting paper message, the call log. When I finished, he nodded once, as if confirming a private theorem. "Tell him it's begun again." He repeated it softly. And within minutes the speaker dies. The correlation is inconveniently persuasive. Meaning? Meaning we are entangled, however unwillingly, in whatever has begun again. I poured coffee. "Maybe it's a lawyers' club prank. You know how those boys relax. Latin puns, practical jokes, slow poison." He didn't rise to it. "Archie, you may indulge your levity later. For now, ascertain Maddox's recent clients, particularly any connected with war service or inheritance litigation." "That's a big field." "Then cultivate it with discretion." He leaned back, eyes half closed. I knew that look, the machinery starting up behind the serene facade. When Wolfe's brain went to work, the world might as well step aside. "You think this ties to something old?" I asked. "I think," he said slowly, "that someone believes the past can be resuscitated by telephone, and I propose to prove him wrong." The office settled into its familiar rhythm, rain ticking the windows, the desk lamp a small sun. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Wolfe reached for the bell cord. "Fritz," he called when the Swiss appeared, towel over his arm. "Mr. Goodwin requires sustenance after his excursion. Bring him a sandwich, and for me, coffee. Hot." I raised an eyebrow. "Coffee at 11? You feeling reckless?" He regarded me with ponderous dignity. "After such a morning, Mr. Goodwin, temperance would be folly." Fritz departed, smiling faintly. I settled into my chair, watching Wolfe's fingers drum the desk. The telephone sat between us like a coiled animal. "You think it'll ring again?" I asked. He glanced at it. "If it does, you will answer." "That's a relief. For a minute I thought you were developing a habit." His eyes half closed. "Archie, the universe would sooner collapse into cinders than compel me to acquire a habit so odious." That was Wolfe. 1 part logic, 1 part theatre, and 1 large part ego wrapped in vocabulary. But under it, I saw the spark. Curiosity, sharp and alive. Whatever the message meant, it had hooked him, and when Wolfe is hooked, Manhattan might as well reserve column space for headlines. At 11:30 he dismissed me to draft a memo of the morning's events. As I typed, I caught him staring once more at the telephone, his expression not angry now, but calculating, like a chess player considering a move that might end the game in one stroke. When Fritz brought the coffee and my sandwich, Wolfe lifted his cup. "Archie, attend carefully. The next time that device rings, we answer Destiny." "Fine," I said. "But if Destiny's selling magazines, you're taking the subscription." He gave me a look that could have wilted orchids, then sipped the coffee with satisfaction. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the brownstone's walls. Inside, the office glowed warm and still, the calm before a case. And somewhere out in the city, a dead lawyer's final words were still echoing down a telephone line that had no business knowing our number. The next morning, while Wolfe's orchids were having their mist, the rest of the brownstone was having weather of its own. The air in the office hung thick with silence and gloom, two of Wolfe's favourite interior decorations. You could have cut it with Fritz's carving knife and served it cold. Wolfe was up in the plant rooms, communing with flowers that didn't talk back. I was at my desk trying to type up the previous day's circus for the records, but the keys might as well have been tapping out taps. The telephone on Wolfe's desk sat like a guilty conscience gleaming in the lamplight. Ever since the late Arlen Maddox had used it to make his last earthly connection, Wolfe treated it as if it were a venomous species of cobra. At 11:01 sharp, the elevator hummed and he came down, massive, immaculate and scowling. His tie was a darker yellow than usual, which meant thunder. I greeted him cheerfully. "Morning, boss. How are the orchids?" "They flourish," he said, lowering himself into the chair with a grunt of upholstery protest. "Unlike the intellect of mankind, which, judging from your attempts at levity, is in decline. Maybe they just need more humidity." He ignored that and reached for the stack of morning mail. Bills, circulars, and one fat envelope sealed with tape instead of taste. He slit it with his gold knife, and 5 neat bundles of $100 bills slid out like guilty witnesses. He raised one brow. 5,000. Some admirer finally took the hint I offered. Should I order flowers? He sniffed the envelope delicately. Then again, deeper. Lavender? French? Not domestic trash. Whoever sent this, female, meticulous, and either reckless or desperate, I said, or a perfume salesman who likes big gestures. He shot me the look that usually precedes my dismissal from Eden. "Mr. Goodwin, there is no generosity in homicide." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared at the dining room doorway, white jacket immaculate. "Someone at the door for you, Mr. Wolfe." I went and answered it. A moment later I showed her in. "Miss Vera Maddox," I said. That name hit like a dropped typewriter. I exchanged glances with Wolfe. He sighed. "Show her in." She entered as if she'd rather not. Tall, willowy, wrapped in a storm-grey coat that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She carried an umbrella the colour of worry. Her face was pale but handsome, the kind that had known both society columns and sleepless nights. "I'm Vera Maddox," she said, voice low but steady. "Arlen Maddox was my brother." Wolfe inclined his head. "My condolences. Please sit." She took the red leather chair opposite him. I noticed her gloves, fine kid skin, lilac-tinted, and the faint, unmistakable scent of lavender that trailed her like a secret. "I must apologize for intruding," she said. "I came because I heard, from the police, that your number appeared on my brother's telephone record. I thought you might explain." "We might," I said helpfully, "if we had any idea why he called. We don't." Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to Wolfe. "I never contacted you, Mr. Wolfe, yet someone sent you money, didn't they?" Wolfe regarded her with half-closed eyes. "Indeed, $5,000 in cash by courier last night. The envelope bore neither name nor note." "Then I'm right," she murmured. "Someone wants you involved, and I must beg you not to be." That earned her Wolfe's full attention. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "An unusual request, Miss Maddox. Most supplicants beg for my attention, not against it." She hesitated. "My brother had been troubled for weeks. He said he'd uncovered something dangerous, connected to a war inheritance file from 1919. He called it Project Lantern. When he spoke of it, She broke off, steadying herself. He said that if anyone began asking questions, the curse would revive. Those were his words. Curse, I repeated. We talking gypsies or lawyers? Her mouth tightened. He meant ruin. He believed someone would kill to keep the past buried. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. How charmingly melodramatic. It wasn't melodrama when he died, she snapped, then immediately coloured. Forgive me, I'm tired. Wolfe inclined his head. Exhaustion is excusable. Murder is not. She clasped her gloves together as though they might pray for her. Please, Mr. Wolfe, I want no investigation. The police will handle it. If this money was sent to you, return it. Destroy it. Whatever you do, don't look into Project Lantern. Miss Maddox, Wolfe said softly, you asked me to blind myself to curiosity. That is an indecent request. I said, besides, we'd have to return the cash. That's against my religion. Her gaze darted to me, half pleading, half angry, then back to Wolfe. I can't stop you, can I? No, he said simply, you cannot. She rose, trembling slightly. Then God help you. When the door closed behind her, the lavender scent lingered like a verdict. I whistled. She's got poise, I'll give her that. Also fear, enough to refrigerate the Hudson. Wolfe stared at the envelope again. Fear is the perfume of guilt, Mr. Goodwin, or of knowledge. Maybe both. So what now? Cash the gift and buy more orchids? He shook his head slowly. No, we keep it as evidence of intent. Someone wishes to engage us, anonymously. That alone merits inquiry. I leaned back. Inquiry into what? A war file 25 years old? He reached for his notebook, the kind bound in Morocco leather and self-importance. Project Lantern. Obtain whatever can be learned from public records, the Department of Defense archives, legal filings, newspaper mentions, and ascertain whether Arlen Maddox had wartime service. That'll keep me off the streets. Splendid. The streets are unhygienic, I grinned, and yet they pay my salary. He grunted. Temporarily. Fritz appeared at the doorway again. Lunch in 10 minutes, gentlemen. Excellent, Wolfe said. Afterward, Archie, you may pursue your research. Do not let the hour of 4 find you idle. I have orchids then. Yes, sir, I said, pretending to salute. By 3 o'clock I was knee-deep in dust at the Municipal Records Building. Maddox had been partner in a firm called Knox, Fane and Maddox, specializing in estates and trusts. Project Lantern appeared once, in a sealed probate entry tied to a Colonel Gresham, deceased 1919, estate unresolved. The file had been reopened 6 weeks ago by Arlen Maddox himself. That was the sort of coincidence that makes homicide look like accounting. I jotted notes and headed back through the drizzle. At 4:20, I found Wolfe in the plant rooms, sleeves rolled, eyes half closed over a tray of Cattleya labiata. The temperature was somewhere between Borneo and bad news. Report, he said without turning. I gave him the highlights. Gresham, sealed file, recent activity. Interesting, he murmured. Colonel Gresham was presumed dead in 1919 after a code breach. If Maddox reopened the estate, he disturbed not a will but a grave. I said, you know, for a guy who hates melodrama, you write it pretty well. He straightened, towering amid the orchids. Phooey, I state facts. That evening, after dinner, a lamb stew that deserved its own monument, I was putting away coats when something caught my eye in the umbrella stand by the door. A small silver matchbook embossed the Airy Club. It smelled faintly, unmistakably, of lavender. I brought it to Wolfe. Evidence or coincidence? He took it between thumb and forefinger. The Airy Club, he read, a private establishment for men of influence and women of discretion, conveniently vague. Maybe Miss Maddox dropped it. Or our courier. He leaned back. Archie, you will visit this club. Observe without intruding. Observe whom? Whoever looks guilty. That's a wide clientele. His lips twitched. Then narrow it. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz entered silently, tray in hand, bearing Wolfe's customary post-prandial beer. The ritual always ended a day. It was as fixed as the rotation of the earth. Wolfe poured into the chilled glass, amber and authority in equal measure. Mr. Goodwin, we have been retained by the dead. I propose we earn our fee. I said, fine by me, but if ghosts start calling, you answer. He sipped, unoffended. I already have. And that was how the brownstone, fragrant with lavender and trouble, settled into night, with a dead lawyer's money on the desk, his sister's warning in the air, and a matchbook pointing toward the next rung of mischief on Manhattan's social ladder. The Erie Club was the kind of place where money didn't talk. It gave orders. You could smell it in the mahogany paneling, hear it in the hush that swallowed footsteps, and see it reflected in the brass rail of the bar that gleamed like conscience polished for inspection. I'd have worn my better tie if I'd known I'd be mingling with so much affluence, but Wolfe doesn't pay me for my tailoring. The elevator let me off on the top floor of the skyscraper, 30 stories above the streets that earned the checks cashed here. A doorman the size of a refrigerator opened the door without smiling. I could tell it wasn't part of his union contract. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and self-satisfaction. I told the maitre d', who looked like he'd been pressed from starch, that I represented Nero Wolfe in a private legal inquiry. That got me raised eyebrows and a side eye toward the far corner where two men occupied a table with more scotch than conversation. Raymond Knox, tall, thin, and brittle as a legal disclaimer, and Julian Fane, slick as a new banknote, both fit the description from Maddox's partnership list. I strolled over, flashing my most harmless grin. "Gentlemen, don't get up. My name's Goodwin, Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into the regrettable demise of your late associate, Mr. Maddox." Knox looked up like someone had just asked him to split the check. For the rest of the afternoon, he dictated note cards, rearranged the evidence, and spoke only to instruct Fritz on the seating arrangement, as if he were directing a dinner party instead of an inquest. By 7:30, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a theatre before curtain, lights low, air thick, suspense crouching in the corners. At 8 on the dot, the cast arrived. Knox first, still wearing the brittle confidence of a man who believes money can outspend guilt. His wife followed, Celia Fane, no longer wearing the tragic widow facade. She looked every inch the society ornament, pearls, violet silk, and gloves the exact shade of lavender that had haunted the case like a ghost with expensive taste. Vera Maddox came next, eyes shadowed, lips thin. She nodded to no one. Julian Fane had been quietly escorted downtown earlier for questioning. Wolfe said he would not be needed for this act. Kramer entered last, accompanied by Stebbins, whose jaw looked eager for something to grind. Kramer gave the room a quick once-over, then muttered, "I hope this circus has an ending, Wolfe." "It does," Wolfe said. "Please, Inspector, your usual chair." Kramer grunted but took it. Fritz, having placed a fresh glass of beer before Wolfe, withdrew silently. The office door clicked shut behind him, sealing us in with truth, guilt, and a faint smell of orchids. Wolfe's gaze moved from face to face. "Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we shall close the circle that began with a telephone call, a call which, as you may recall, preceded the death of Mr. Arlen Maddox." He paused long enough for Knox to shift uncomfortably. "You, Mr. Knox, will forgive my brevity. I have no appetite for rhetoric tonight." Knox tried a smile. "Then I'm already ahead of you." Wolfe ignored the quip. "In 1919, gentlemen, ladies, a project known as Lantern was created within the War Department to transfer dormant estates of soldiers killed in Europe. In theory, the funds went to distant relatives or designated trustees. In practice, they went to men like you, Mr. Knox, and your associates. Maddox was your financier. Colonel Edward Gresham, your figurehead, declared dead but, on paper, alive long enough to sign authorizations. Celia's gloved hands trembled slightly. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "The lavender scent, Mrs. Fane, has clung to this affair like the memory of sin. It appeared in Maddox's office, on your chauffeur's clothing, on the microfilm reel, and, naturally, on you." Her voice was a whisper. "I don't understand." "Madam, you understand entirely," Wolfe said. "Lavender was not sentiment, it was signal, a private mark between you and your husband to denote those files tied to Project Lantern. Maddox, once complicit, had grown anxious. He intended to reveal the scheme to the Treasury. You visited him that night under the pretext of reconciliation. The cigarette he smoked was laced with hydrocyanic acid." Knox shot to his feet. "That's absurd. You can't prove—" "Sit down," Kramer barked. "Let him finish before I decide to help him prove it." Knox hesitated, then sank back, face flushed. Wolfe went on. "You were clever, Mr. Knox. You made the murder appear tidy. Maddox's safe emptied, his death attributed to overwork and indulgence. But you overlooked your accomplice's panic. The chauffeur, Larrabee, discovered the residue of the operation. He knew too much. You sent him to retrieve the microfilm from the Fane household, intending to dispose of him afterward. Instead, he panicked, attempted to seek protection here. That was why he died in my elevator. For a moment, no one breathed. Wolfe continued, softer now. The phrase "lantern burns tonight" found in his pocket was your code, Mr. Knox. You reactivated the project through dormant trust accounts, using the names of the war dead as conduits for fraudulent bonds. You mistook history for a vault, but the past leaks, Mr. Knox. Always. The words hung there, heavy as the smell of Wolfe's beer. Celia gave a small, strangled sound. Raymond, he said it was over, that we'd buried it years ago. Wolfe inclined his head. You buried only the evidence, Mrs. Fane, not the guilt. Knox rose again, slower this time, his bravado drained. You can theorize all you like, he said, but you've got no proof, no witness. On the contrary, Wolfe said, we have both, Mr. Goodwin. That was my cue. I opened the folder on my desk and slid out a page. Statement from Saul Panzer, I said, dated this morning. He located the chemical supplier who provided the lavender solution used by Mrs. Fane's household. Same compound found on Maddox's cigarettes and on the chauffeur's gloves. Also, I handed it to Kramer, photostats of bank transfers from dormant war bond trusts to an account under the name E. Gresham, later redirected to a shell corporation managed by Knox Holdings. Kramer skimmed the pages, then looked up, expression grim. That'll do. Knox took a step backward, but Stebbins was already moving. Don't bother, Stebbins said, and his hand came down heavy on Knox's shoulder. Celia collapsed into her chair, eyes glassy. Wolfe's tone softened, not out of pity, but precision. Madam, you may find comfort in honesty. The inspector will grant you that courtesy. Kramer turned to Wolfe. You could have given me this hours ago. I could, Wolfe said, but then you would have arrested prematurely, and I dislike unfinished work. Kramer's cigar twitched between his fingers. You're still the same pompous. He stopped, sighed, and shook his head. But for once, Wolfe, I'm glad you picked up the phone. Wolfe inclined his head. Inspector, so am I. Stebbins led Knox toward the door. Celia followed unsteadily, supported by Vera Maddox, who had lost her bitterness somewhere along the way. When they were gone, silence filled the room like a deep exhale. Kramer lingered. You know, he said quietly, you drive me crazy, but you're thorough. I'll give you that. Wolfe nodded once. You are a capable man, Inspector. When the law requires an anvil, it finds one in you. Yeah, Kramer said. And when it needs a scalpel, it finds you. See you in court. He left with Stebbins, shutting the door behind him. For a long moment, Wolfe didn't move. The orchids glowed softly above his head, their petals the only colour in a room that had seen too much grey. Finally he reached for the beer, sipped and said, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. You may now record this case as concluded. Title it The Call Answered Again. I raised an eyebrow. You naming them now? He ignored me, staring into his glass. An apt symmetry. One call began it, another ends it. A small concession to irony. Speaking of irony, I said, you realize this is the first time in history you've voluntarily spoken on the phone. 1 call, 3 murders solved. Imagine if we installed a radio. He gave me a glare that would have melted solder. Mr. Goodwin, imagine unemployment, I grinned. Touché, though you'd have to handle the typing yourself, and we both know that's a crime against civilization. He grunted, which for Wolfe was practically laughter. Fritz, he called. Fritz appeared in the doorway, immaculate as ever. Yes, sir? Dinner, trout in white wine sauce, and perhaps coffee for Mr. Goodwin. He has earned his indulgence. That was as close to affection as Wolfe ever got in public. I nodded my thanks. While Fritz withdrew, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, hands steepled over his vest. There is an unpleasant lesson in this affair, he said quietly. Communication, once begun, cannot be recalled. One speaks, and the world listens. I said, that's poetic, but I'd stick to orchids if you're planning a career change. Phooey, he said, though not with much conviction. The room was peaceful now. Outside, the city hummed like a giant machine cooling down after a hard day. Inside, Wolfe's office smelled of order again. Beer, leather, faint cigar smoke. No lavender, no ghosts. I finished typing the last line of the report, slid it into the drawer and leaned back. Well, boss, it's over. Knox is booked, Mrs. Fane will sing, and Kramer's blood pressure might finally normalize. Doubtful, Wolfe murmured, but let us hope. You realize, I added, this started with a phone call you didn't want to take. That's practically sentimental. He opened one eye. If you persist in sentiment, I shall revoke your coffee. I saluted. Message received. He closed his eyes again, settling deeper into the chair. Good. Then be quiet. I have orchids at 4. I chuckled softly, watching the great man drift toward his evening peace, and thought how the universe occasionally shows mercy, usually by ending the day before we can make it worse. Somewhere, far off, a phone rang. Wolfe didn't flinch. He merely said, eyes still closed, "Answer it, Archie." And I did, because once in a while the world calls, and somebody has to pick up. Fane arrived dead in my house, Inspector? That's what I'd like to know, Kramer said. Maybe you can tell me. You're the one who's been poking around her business. Wolfe didn't rise to the bait. He was murdered elsewhere, he said. The absence of blood and the condition of his skin suggest asphyxiation or poison. His presence here indicates message, not coincidence. Meaning? Meaning, Wolfe said. Someone chose this house as a stage for emphasis. Kramer rubbed his temple. You're telling me somebody carried a corpse across Manhattan just to drop it in your elevator? I'm telling you, Wolfe replied, that someone intended to tell me something. Kramer's eyes flicked to me. And what does the note mean? Lantern burns tonight? If I knew, I said, I'd light one myself. He grunted. You think this ties back to Maddox? Wolfe said, Inspector, every thread in this tapestry leads to the same rotten loom. Kramer's patience frayed visibly. You're impossible. Consistently, Wolfe said. For a minute, no one spoke. The coroner's men arrived, muttering as they wheeled the body out. Wolfe watched them go, hands gripping the chair arms tighter than usual. For a man who prided himself on order, a corpse in his elevator was blasphemy. When the men left, he finally exhaled. Mr. Goodwin, fetch Mr. Pantzer. We must trace the chauffeur's last employment details. Kramer turned sharply. You'll do no such thing. This is police business now. Wolfe's tone iced over. You are mistaken. It is my business until you discover who dares invade my sanctuary. After that, I will decide whether to assist you. Kramer's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. He turned to me. Keep him on a leash, Goodwin. If he tampers with evidence, I'll make sure he doesn't, I said. You can trust me. That, Kramer said, is what scares me. He left with Stebbins in tow, barking orders about fingerprints and transport. When the door closed and silence reclaimed the brownstone, Wolfe sagged slightly as though gravity had increased. Fritz, he called. Fritz appeared instantly. Sir? Air the hall, then burn the rug inside the elevator. Fritz's eyes widened. Burn, sir? Yes, the odour of intrusion is intolerable. Fritz nodded solemnly and withdrew. I leaned against the desk. You know, for a man who hates disturbance, you attract more than a Times Square neon sign. Wolfe glared. Mr. Goodwin, your remark was not merely in poor taste, it was unsalted. That's fair, I said. I'll add seasoning once we get the bill for cleaning. He ignored me, staring toward the elevator. The sanctity of this house, he murmured, has been violated. Someone has crossed a line that cannot be crossed twice. I said, then we better make sure they don't get the chance for a sequel. He met my eye. Quite. Summon Saul. Already on it, I said, heading for the phone. As I dialed, I caught Wolfe's reflection in the window. Massive, still, but no longer serene. For all his intellect, Wolfe treated the brownstone like a monastery, and someone had just left a corpse on the altar. When Saul answered, I gave him the essentials. Chauffeur named Larrabee. Used to work for Mrs. Fane. Find out who hired him last, where he went last night, and whether he picked up any extra passengers, or packages. Got it, Saul said, and hung up. I turned back to Wolfe. Orders delivered. He nodded once. Good. Then we wait. Mind if I open a window first? Air's getting thick. Do as you like, he said, but not too wide. I prefer to control what enters this house. I cracked it an inch and let the spring rain slip through, bringing in the city's noise. Somewhere down the block a siren wailed, maybe for us, maybe for somebody else. Wolfe lifted his glass of beer, took a slow sip, and set it down precisely. Archie. Yeah? From this point forward, no one enters without my sanction. Not Kramer, not the press, not even our own cook, understood? Sure, I said. We'll put up a sign, dead men by appointment only. That earned a glare worthy of marble sculpture. Enough. Attend to your notes. The day will not improve. I sat at my desk, typing the report while the rain pattered against the windows, and Wolfe retreated into silence. For once, even I didn't crack wise. There are days when the brownstone feels like a fortress, and others when it feels like a target. That morning, it was both. If curiosity ever killed the cat, I was a Bengal tiger on borrowed time. At 9 sharp the next morning, Saul Panzer materialized in the office doorway, looking as if he'd followed a ghost through a rainstorm. He removed his hat, dropped into the red chair and said, "Got your chauffeur, Archie. Name's Larrabee. Used to drive Raymond Knox, Maddox's surviving partner, then transferred 3 weeks ago to the Fane household. Quit or got fired, depending on who's talking." Wolfe closed his book, marking the place with one massive finger. "Knox," he murmured. "The brittle one. A man who decorates his conscience with mahogany." "His office still in the Grey Bar building," Saul added. "Private suite, unlisted number. He's got money, and he likes people to notice." Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. "You will visit him, Archie." "Visit," I said. "As what? Insurance, florist, or friendly neighborhood spy?" "As yourself," he said, "which is regrettable but occasionally effective. Mr. Knox will respond to charm, or bluster. Employ whichever proves least taxing." I gave Saul a nod. "If I don't come back, send flowers." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "You will return. Whether intact is your responsibility." Raymond Knox's office looked like it had been designed by a man allergic to warmth. Chrome, glass, and enough polish to blind the average taxpayer. Knox himself stood by the window, thin, immaculately suited, and taut as a violin string that needed cutting. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice clipped. "What's the meaning of this unannounced call?" "I represent Nero Wolfe," I said easily, "and he dislikes telephones. They interrupt digestion." That earned a flicker of disdain. "You're investigating Maddox's death, I presume?" "I'm not sure investigating is the word," I said. "Let's call it fact-finding with a side of curiosity." His mouth tightened. "Then you're wasting your time. Maddox's affairs are settled. Mine are not your concern." "Maybe not," I said, strolling toward the bookshelf. "But you had a chauffeur named Larrabee who's been making trouble. He's dead." That stopped him. "Dead?" "Found this morning," I said, "in our elevator." His reaction was a masterclass in polite panic. A blink, a swallow, a measured turn toward the window. "I see. Tragic." "Sure," I said, "but not half as tragic as what he might have been carrying." "Carrying?" "Documents. Maybe something to do with a phrase, 'lantern burns tonight.' Mean anything?" His hand froze on the curtain cord. "No." "Good," I said. "Then you won't mind if I take a look around." He spun, eyes cold. "This is private property." "So's an elevator, technically," I said, "yet corpses don't seem to respect it." He reached for the phone and I smiled. "You could call your lawyer Mr. Knox, but that might raise questions. Better to let me look and leave quietly. You'll sleep better." He hesitated, then dropped the receiver with a sigh. "You have 5 minutes." That was all I needed. I moved like curiosity with a stopwatch, noting the modern art, the locked filing drawers, the faint hum near the back wall. It wasn't noise exactly, more like vibration. The wall panel beside his desk had a hairline seam, and through it leaked a thread of pale light. "Well," I said softly, "either your decorator's experimenting with mood lighting, or you've got something glowing in there." Knox's tone went rigid. "Step away from that panel." But I was already running my fingers along the edge. The latch clicked and the panel swung open, revealing a compact wall safe barely ajar. Inside was the source of the light, a miniature bulb left burning above a single microfilm reel labelled, in neat typewriter font, "Lantern." For a second, neither of us moved. Then he lunged. I stepped aside, grabbed the nearest folder, and flipped a page. "You really should have changed the bulb," I said. "Makes your secrets look theatrical." He froze as I pulled a photostat camera from my coat, one of Saul's little tricks. Before he found his voice, I'd snapped 2 shots of the reel and slid the photostats into my pocket. I left the reel untouched in the safe. Knox's face flushed crimson. "You have no right." The phone on his desk rang, sharp and shrill. He jumped, then picked it up. "Yes." A pause. His voice dropped. "What? Here? Now?" He hung up slowly, turned back, and said in a tone drained of polish, "The police are on their way. Someone phoned an anonymous tip." I smiled. "Then you'll excuse me. I never like being found at the scene of good intentions." I was halfway down the hall when I heard the elevator bell and saw the familiar shape of Inspector Kramer stepping out with a detective in tow. I turned left instead of right, ducked into a stairwell, and took the 4 flights down on nerves and adrenaline. The city air outside felt like freedom laced with exhaust. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had rearranged his desk into a courtroom. The note cards were stacked, the magnifying glass polished, and Fritz was serving beer with funereal dignity. "You're late," Wolfe said. "Traffic," I said, tossing him the photostat envelope. "And police. You were right about Knox's decor. It's brittle enough to crack. He's hiding something labelled lantern, and it glows." He extracted the prints, studied them, and made a low sound that wasn't quite satisfaction. "Microfilm," he said. "How provincial." "Yeah," I said. "Only this provincial bit of celluloid had names on it. Wartime identities, estate transfers, payments to E. Gresham. Recognize it?" He nodded slowly. "Gresham. The officer who was declared dead in France. His resurrection, it seems, has been lucrative." "And the lavender perfume again," I said. "The real casing reeked of it." "Mrs. Fane," Wolfe murmured, "always at the margins of guilt. She was not entirely truthful." "That's news," I said. "She lies like other people breathe." He ignored that. "The motive clarifies. Maddox and his partners exploited the identities of the war dead to construct false estates, reopening trusts, diverting inheritances. Project Lantern was not espionage. It was theft in patriotic clothing." "Then someone's reviving it now," I said. "Yes," he replied softly, "and killing to keep the light from dimming." I poured myself a ginger ale. "So what's next? Do we call Kramer and confess we're smarter than him again?" "Not yet," Wolfe said. "Knowledge, like beer, requires proper temperature. Too soon. It froths." "Fine," I said. "Just tell me we're locking the elevator." He gave a small, grim smile. "Mr. Goodwin, tonight we keep every door locked. When men traffic in the dead, they have a habit of visiting the living." He reached for the bell cord, signaling Fritz, and leaned back, eyes half closed. "Tomorrow, we shall illuminate the rest of this lantern." And as the office settled into its heavy quiet, I couldn't help thinking how right he was. Truth had a nasty way of burning whoever tried to hold it. At 6:47 that evening, Nero Wolfe did something rarer than a summer diet. He called Inspector Kramer voluntarily. I was at my desk, pretending to update the notes while actually timing how long it would take the inspector to blow a fuse. Wolfe, of course, was serene as a Buddha with a telephone cord instead of a halo. "Good evening, Inspector," he said, his tone as smooth as chilled cream. "You may record this as one of my least self-serving calls. I require a measure of cooperation." The receiver growled. "You calling to confess?" "Hardly. I am preparing to host what you might call a legal consultation. Certain parties will attend, voluntarily, I assure you. However, I expect resistance, and I will not have my employees endangered. If you wish to observe from a prudent distance, I shall not object." "Is this a joke?" Kramer snapped. "It is a courtesy," Wolfe said. "You may choose to extend me the same, or you may arrive later to take notes." A long exhale filled the line. "Damn it, Wolfe. Every time you start cooperating, I get nervous. What are you planning?" "A revelation, Inspector," Wolfe said simply. "And perhaps, if you attend, an exoneration." Kramer muttered something unintelligible, then, "You're still a pain, but you're no liar. I'll have men nearby. If this circus goes wrong, I'm holding you responsible." Wolfe's lips twitched. "A burden I bear gladly." When he hung up, I said, "That was downright cordial. If you two keep this up, they'll revoke your feud license." He ignored me, reaching for the bell cord. "Fritz, beer. And prepare the office. We expect company." By 8 o'clock the stage was set. The air was thick with the aroma of orchids and anticipation. Wolfe sat behind his desk like a magistrate presiding over a private inquisition. His yellow silk house robe caught the lamplight. Beside him gleamed a single glass of beer, the kind of chilled amber that could have tempted angels or juries. The audience assembled reluctantly. Vera Maddox first, pale and composed. Raymond Knox next, tight-lipped and sweating. Julian Fane arrived last, escorting his wife like a man leading a witness who might faint. Mrs. Fane's lavender gloves were gone, replaced by nerves and a pearl brooch trembling on her collarbone. I showed them to their seats. Fritz remained at the doorway and withdrew silently. Wolfe surveyed the group. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you are here because deceit has exhausted its utility. One of you murdered Arlen Maddox to conceal the resurrection of certain wartime funds, codenamed Project Lantern." Knox sputtered. "This is outrageous. You have no authority." "Authority," Wolfe interrupted, "is a construct of competence, Mr. Knox. Permit me to demonstrate mine." He turned slightly toward me. "Archie, the envelope, please." I handed him the photostat of the microfilm label. Wolfe held it up like evidence at a trial. "This reel," he said, "contains the names of officers presumed dead, men whose estates were fraudulently reopened, their assets redirected to false heirs. Colonel Edward Gresham's name appears among them. His signature authorized the transfers. Convenient, considering he was buried in France. Julian Fane's face had gone paper white. "You're insane," he muttered. "Perhaps," Wolfe said mildly, "but my insanity is well documented. Mrs. Fane, your husband's involvement predated Maddox's death. Did he inform you of these inheritances?" She clasped her hands, knuckles whitening. He said they were legitimate restorations, families who'd been denied." "Phooey," Wolfe said sharply. "A euphemism for theft." Knox shifted in his chair, dabbing at his forehead. "If you think I profited—" "I do not think," Wolfe said. "I deduce. The chauffeur Larrabee served you before transferring to Mrs. Fane's employ. You sent him to recover the microfilm after Maddox's death. Unfortunately for him, someone decided his discretion was insufficient." All eyes turned toward Mrs. Fane. She flinched, then whispered, "No, I never—" But Wolfe cut her off with a gesture. "Mrs. Fane, you left a glove in this office. Lavender. The same scent marked the chauffeur's jacket and the reel's container. It was you who entered Maddox's office the night he died. He threatened to expose the fraud, and you silenced him." Julian half rose. "That's a lie." Wolfe's gaze slid toward him. "Sit down, Mr. Fane. Your wife's courage has exceeded yours for some time. I suggest you let her speak." She sank back, trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "Raymond said Maddox would only be warned." "Raymond," Wolfe repeated softly, turning to Knox. "So your conscience found delegation convenient. How merciful." Knox's composure cracked like cheap veneer. "She begged me. Maddox was threatening us all." Wolfe lifted a hand, silencing him. "Threatening exposure, yes, because he realized the funds had been revived again, under your names. But you, Mr. Knox, lack the stomach for blood. You employed intermediaries." He leaned back, voice dropping to a murmur. "Murder, I have found, is rarely personal. It is administrative." Vera Maddox's voice cut through, brittle and cold. "You've said quite enough, Mr. Wolfe. My brother was no saint, but he didn't deserve—" "Madam," Wolfe interrupted, "you have my sympathy, but not your brother's innocence. He opened the door to this by keeping those files alive." Vera's composure faltered. She turned away, shoulders rigid. The silence that followed had weight. Even the orchids seemed to hold their breath. Then Wolfe reached for the bell cord and pulled. The soft chime was the signal for Fritz, who entered not with beer but with Inspector Kramer. Kramer filled the doorway like a storm cloud, cigar clenched tight. "All right," he growled. "Which one of you fine citizens wants to start explaining before I pick?" Mrs. Fane gasped. Knox froze. Wolfe merely gestured toward the assembled group. "Inspector, I present your field of harvest. I trust you brought sufficient binders." Kramer eyed Wolfe, then the suspects. "You always have to stage it, don't you?" "It is efficient," Wolfe said. "The facts ripen best under observation." Kramer's gaze softened for half a second. "You and your metaphors. All right, Wolfe, I'll give you this. You don't lie. You're still impossible, but you don't lie. High praise indeed, Wolfe said dryly. As Kramer's men moved in to take statements, Wolfe leaned back and exhaled, the faintest trace of fatigue crossing his features. I knew that look. It meant he was both satisfied and starving. Fritz, he murmured. Dinner, if you please. Fritz inclined his head and vanished. I turned to Wolfe. So the curtain falls, the villainous swoons, and the inspector takes a bow, nicely staged. He gave me a side glance. Mr. Goodwin, if you insist on theatrical analogies, recall that the stage requires lighting. Without me, you would still be groping in the dark. True, I said, but I'd be doing it with better company. Pfui, he said, closing his eyes. Outside, Kramer's voice rumbled orders, chairs scraped, and Manhattan's night hummed beyond the curtained windows. Inside the brownstone, the show was over, but the air still carried the faint scent of lavender, a reminder that even the best performances leave something behind. If you ever want to see Nero Wolfe commit an act of physical courage, don't bother waiting for him to leave the brownstone. Just watch him pick up a telephone. The next morning at precisely 10:14, he did it, his thick fingers curling around the receiver like it was a venomous snake he'd decided to domesticate. Fritz and I both stared. Fritz because he's human, and me because I never waste the chance to witness history. Wolfe's tone was civil, almost courtly. Inspector Kramer, good morning. I believe the time has come to conclude our conversation. A rumble echoed from the other end that probably shook the desk at police headquarters. Wolfe endured it with his usual patience. Yes, Inspector. Tonight, if you please. Bring no one except yourself and Sergeant Stebbins. There will be no violence, only a necessary conclusion. He hung up, exhaled through his nose, and reached for his coffee. Archie, he said, notify Mr. Pantzer that his services are concluded. Then ensure our guests are punctual this evening. Sure, I said. And should I also alert the Philharmonic that their competition's about to close for good? He glared. Your frivolity is less tolerable than usual. I am occupied. That was an understatement. The secretary looked up, a slim brunette with eyes sharp enough to cut paper and hands that trembled only when they didn't have something to hold. I'm afraid Mr. Gresham's not available, she said. I didn't expect him to be, I said. Dying does limit one's appointments. She blinked, recovered, and smiled the professional smile of a woman who's been trained to handle maniacs politely. If this is a joke, not my best, I said, but I'm working on it. Maybe you can tell me who authorized the trust reopening. I can't discuss that, she said. Client confidentiality. I took a step closer, catching the glint of something pale beneath her typewriter, a lavender sachet, fallen and half-crushed. When she saw my eyes drop, she paled further. That's nothing, she said quickly, reaching for it. But Saul was faster. He picked it up, sniffed it, and raised an eyebrow. Imported, he said. Grass lavender. Same scent as Maddox's office. She swallowed hard. You'll have to leave. Sure, I said. But when you finish destroying the rest of those files, make sure you keep one for your own lawyer. That hit home. Her hands shook just enough to make the shredder hum louder. You don't understand, she whispered. There are people. Always are, I said. But we make it our business to understand them. She glanced toward the window as if considering escape, then reached into her desk, pulled out a half-burned memo and handed it to me. If anyone asks, you didn't get this here. The paper was brittle with age, stamped U.S. Army Intelligence, Project Lantern. Beneath it, one handwritten note. Subject Gresham, alive. That was enough to curdle coffee. Saul gave her a look that could have been sympathy or warning. We left before the guard downstairs decided he'd seen too much initiative for one day. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had parked himself behind his desk, fortified with a tray of sandwiches and a pitcher of beer. The air smelled of malt and deduction. I handed him the memo while Saul perched unobtrusively near the bookshelves. Wolfe studied the page, face expressionless except for a slow tightening around the eyes. So, he said at last, the dead persist. Not surprising. Governments, like men, find it difficult to bury their mistakes. Colonel Gresham, I said. What was his mistake, dying or coming back? Neither, Wolfe said. His error was being useful to men who preferred ghosts to witnesses. He held the sachet Saul had retrieved and sniffed delicately. Lavender again, the scent of concealment. Or fancy laundry, I said. Either way, it's making a comeback. He gave me a look that could have chilled champagne. Mr. Goodwin, frivolity is wasted when truth peeks through the drapery. Lavender to mask corruption, Project Lantern to resurrect espionage, and a trust account to launder the past. That's poetic, I said, but we still don't know who's holding the shovel. Patience, he murmured. Resurrection requires time. The phrase, "it's begun again," spoken by a dying man, suggests repetition, some wartime operation revived under a domestic guise. Saul cleared his throat. You think Maddox found out? Undoubtedly, Wolfe said, and paid the price for knowledge. There is a contagion in certain secrets. They kill not from malice, but from exposure. I said, if this is a contagion, we should probably start charging hazard pay. He ignored me. You will both continue. Mr. Pantzer, discreet surveillance of the woman at the trust. Mr. Goodwin, trace Colonel Gresham's financial ghost. Where the account transfers, who signs, who benefits. I gave a mock salute. Aye, aye, sir. Operation Lavender is underway. That got the faintest flicker at the corner of his mouth. If I ever command aspiring, Mr. Goodwin, I will staff it with fewer comedians. Then it'll be a dull ring, I said. Possibly, he conceded, but efficient. He leaned back, eyes half closed, lost in the labyrinth that only he could see. The office was quiet except for the slow tick of the wall clock and the rain beginning again on the windows. Fritz appeared in the doorway, white jacket immaculate, and asked if Wolfe would have his beer refreshed. Yes, Wolfe said absently, and another glass for Mr. Goodwin. He has earned his portion. That was Wolfe's version of affection, served cold and foaming. Fritz vanished to fulfill it. Saul gathered his hat. I'll report tomorrow, he said, and left as quietly as he'd come. When the door closed, Wolfe spoke again softly. Archie. Yeah? Do not underestimate ghosts. They are patient. Sure, I said, but they're lousy tippers. That earned me a long, silent glare followed by the faint sound of his sigh, the kind that meant he'd already forgiven me, which was his way of saying be careful. As I poured the beer Fritz brought, the scent of lavender still lingered faintly in the air. Outside, the rain kept time against the glass, steady, relentless, and as old as secrets. If mystery ever decided to wear perfume, it would smell exactly like the woman who rang our bell at 20 minutes past 8 that night, somewhere between violet and trouble. I was halfway through my lamb chops when Fritz's discreet cough came from the dining room doorway. Wolfe looked up from his plate, fork suspended in mid-air. Yes, Fritz? A lady to see you, sir, at this hour. His accent turned hour into something noble and faintly disapproving. A lady? Wolfe repeated. Not a solicitor? No, sir. She is most certainly a lady. That was enough to make Wolfe's eyebrows twitch. Mine too. Clients who came by daylight usually brought money. Clients who came after dark brought complications. Show her in, Wolfe said, dabbing his mouth with the napkin, and removed my plate. I dislike combining ingestion with interrogation. Fritz departed with the grace of a man retreating from incoming artillery. The woman who entered could have sold mystery by the yard. She was tall, impeccably turned out in a fitted black suit with a wide-brimmed hat that managed to shade her eyes without concealing the fact that they had too much story behind them. But it was the gloves that caught the lamplight, lavender, soft and entirely out of place in the season or the hour. Mr. Wolfe, she asked, voice cool and precise, like someone used to addressing committees that didn't scare her. Wolfe inclined his head. Indeed. And you are? Mrs. Celia Fane. She removed one glove and extended her hand. Wolfe ignored it. I didn't. Her handshake was light, but her pulse beat quick beneath the skin. Wolfe gestured toward the red leather chair. Pray be seated. She sank into it gracefully, crossing one leg over the other, the lavender glove dangling from her hand like punctuation. I must apologize for intruding during your dinner. Wolfe waved a hand. Fritz will preserve it. My appetite is resilient. What brings you here? I believe you've already been drawn into a matter connected with my husband's firm, Knox, Fane and Maddox. I said, we've been in the neighbourhood. Her eyes flicked toward me, calculated, appraising, and not entirely disapproving. "Then you know Arlen Maddox is dead." "We've heard whispers," I said. "Hard to ignore with the police making them." Wolfe cleared his throat, which in his case is equivalent to a foghorn. "Mrs. Fane, what precisely is your business with me?" She hesitated, gloved fingers tightening around her handbag. "I phoned this house 2 nights ago." That got Wolfe's full attention. "You were the caller?" Her chin lifted. "Yes." "You said, 'Tell him it's begun again.'" A pause. "Yes." "Why?" Wolfe asked. She looked past him to the fire as if its reflection could explain her. "Because I was frightened. My husband died last year, but before he did, he told me that certain papers related to an old government operation called Project Lantern were in danger of resurfacing. He begged me to destroy them. I didn't. Now someone else has them." I leaned forward. "Let me guess. The someone isn't sending thank you notes." Her eyes darted to me, sharp as glass. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm aware of your reputation for levity. Please don't apply it to the dead." "Ma'am," I said, "around here, death and levity travel together for safety." Wolfe broke in, voice smooth as velvet over steel. "Project Lantern. We've heard the name. You say your husband wished the papers destroyed. Why?" "Because he was afraid of exposure," she said softly. "Lantern was an intelligence sting during the war. It went wrong. Men died, spies, agents, soldiers. My husband handled the post-war settlements. He told me that if the code book ever reappeared, lives would be in danger again." "Lives?" Wolfe repeated. "Plural?" She nodded. "Those involved in the cover-up. The names were significant." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you possess this code book?" Her answer came too fast. "No." "Ah," he murmured. "Then you did." The silence that followed was taut enough to stretch wire. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The gloved hand trembled once against the handbag. "I didn't come to be cross-examined, Mr. Wolfe." "Then you have come to the wrong address," he said. That earned him a look half fury, half admiration. "I came to warn you. Someone is using Project Lantern for blackmail, or worse. Maddox found out and was killed for it. If you value your safety, drop the matter." "Madam," Wolfe said with heavy patience, "my safety is the least of my interests. Others have been attempting to endanger it for years, always without success." I added, "Besides, he's allergic to curiosity left unsatisfied." She rose abruptly. "Then I've done my duty. Good evening." Wolfe's tone stopped her cold. "One moment. You mentioned a code book. How did you know it survived?" Her eyes flickered, 1 second too long. "I didn't." "Phooey," Wolfe said softly. "You knew, and you slipped. That, Mrs. Fane, is why your husband's ghost is restless." She drew a sharp breath, colour draining from her face. "You think I think," Wolfe interrupted, "you know more than you intend to say, and I think your perfume betrays you." She blinked. "Perfume?" "Lavender," he said. "It has followed this case like a shadow." Her composure cracked, just for an instant. "I can't discuss it. Please, leave it alone." She turned, fumbling for her coat. One glove fell to the carpet, unnoticed. I bent to pick it up, but by the time I straightened, the front door was closing behind her. "She didn't exactly overstay her welcome," I said. "No," Wolfe replied. "She accomplished her purpose, to impart half-truths and depart before the rest escaped." He eyed the glove in my hand. "A token, perhaps?" "Maybe she's just careless," I said. "Or maybe she wanted to make sure we'd follow her scent." Wolfe frowned. "If you intend that literally, Mr. Goodwin, you will do so in daylight. At night, temptation breeds stupidity." Now," I said, "you're thinking of someone else's stupidity." He pressed the bell cord. "Fritz will bring my coffee. And, Archie." "Yes?" "If you insist on courting danger, at least allow me to choose your widow's flowers." "Lilies, then?" I said. "Phooey." But I didn't wait for Lily's or Fritz's coffee. 10 minutes later I was in the street, coat collar up against the drizzle, the lavender glove in my pocket. The city at night has a way of keeping its secrets lit from beneath, like a poker table hiding the dealer's hands. I didn't know where Mrs. Fane lived, but I knew where her kind went to vanish. I circled the block, scanning for taxis. And there she was, half a block ahead, standing under the glow of a lamppost, summoning a cab. Her hat was gone now, her hair loosened by wind and nerves. When the taxi pulled up, she hesitated just long enough for me to see her companion step out of the shadows and join her. Julian Fane. Alive, perfectly tailored, and definitely not dead. They spoke briefly, too quiet for me to catch, but the body language told enough. Urgency, fear, familiarity. Then she climbed into the cab, and he followed. The car pulled away, taillights slicing the mist. I considered hailing another taxi and following them, but Wolfe's voice floated up in memory. At night, temptation breeds stupidity. For once I decided to humour him. I went home instead. When I returned, the brownstone was warm and glowing, Fritz already polishing glasses for Wolfe's evening beer. Wolfe himself was at the desk, eyes closed, fingers tented. "You were gone 40 minutes, he said without opening them. "Timed me?" "I time everything. Report." So I did. Every detail, down to the lavender glove and the cab that carried her away. When I finished, he sighed. Julian Fane alive, intriguing. The resurrection theme persists. "Maybe he just didn't like his obituaries," I said. "Mr. Goodwin, levity will not unearth a corpse or explain why its widow still wears gloves in July." He took the glove from my hand, turning it delicately. "This woman is either a victim or an accomplice, possibly both." "And Julian?" "Ah, he complicates the pattern. He may be the hand that guides or the shadow it casts." He set the glove beside his beer glass. "Archie, I caution you again. Do not pursue her alone." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. He looked up, eyes half-lidded. "Liar." That was my cue to grin. "You know me too well," he muttered, regrettably. Fritz appeared, bearing the tray. "Your coffee, sir." "Thank you, Fritz." Wolfe poured, inhaled the steam, and pronounced judgment. "Superb." I said, "You're welcome, even if you meant Fritz." He ignored me. "Tomorrow we shall invite Mrs. Fane to resume her glove collection under more controlled circumstances." "And if she declines?" "Then I will summon Inspector Kramer and ensure she regrets her modesty." He raised the cup, sipped and closed his eyes in satisfaction. I leaned back in my chair. You know, I kind of liked her. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "your appreciation for beauty is commendable. Your discernment of danger, less so." "Well," I said, "you can't have everything." "Indeed," he murmured, "and you, Archie, insist on proving it." He reached for the bell cord again, signalling the end of discussion. Outside, the drizzle thickened into rain, washing the city's grime down to its conscience. Inside, Wolfe sat unmoved, the lavender glove lying on the desk between us, a soft, silent witness to a truth that wasn't done with us yet. There are ways a man likes to start his morning, and none of them involve Fritz shouting my name like he's seen the ghost of Switzerland past. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when his voice floated up the stairs, quivering between outrage and alarm. "Mr. Goodwin, please, come now!" That tone could have meant anything from burned omelettes to burglary, so I grabbed my jacket and took the steps 2 at a time. Fritz was standing in the hall, pale as a poached egg, one hand clutching his apron like a flag of surrender. The elevator door stood open, gaping like a mouth that had just swallowed something it regretted. I leaned in. The car held a man slumped against the brass rail, hat askew, head tilted forward. He wasn't going anywhere voluntarily. "Well," I said, "either he came for breakfast and overdid it, or we've got ourselves a house guest of the permanent variety." Fritz crossed himself. I opened the door, and there he was. He does not move. No argument there. I stepped inside, checking for a pulse. Nothing but chill and stillness. His face was unfamiliar, chauffeur's uniform impeccable, gloves still on. One of them bore a faint smear of lavender powder, the kind you'd expect to find near Mrs. Fane's dresser, not on a man's cuff. Behind me, Wolfe's voice floated from the office doorway, deep and resonant. "Archie, report." I turned. He was standing there in his yellow silk robe, monumental and calm except for the faint narrowing of his eyes, the Wolfe version of a panic attack. "We've acquired decor you won't like," I said. "One dead man, male, mid-30s, imported uniform. He rode up but forgot to step out." Wolfe approached the threshold, stopping exactly 3 feet from the body as though the corpse might stain the parquet by osmosis. "Phooey," he muttered. "In my elevator." "Yeah," I said. "And he didn't even pay the fare." He gave me a look that could have peeled wallpaper. "Your levity, Mr. Goodwin, is not tonic. Who is he?" "That's the puzzle," I said, checking his pockets. "Wallet's gone, no papers, but he's got this." I pulled a folded scrap from the breast pocket, creased, oily, smelling faintly of engine grease and perfume. On it, in block letters, the message read, "Lantern burns tonight." I read it, jotted the wording into my notebook, and put it back in his pocket. When Wolfe arrived, I said, "Note in his pocket, lantern burns tonight." I didn't move it. Wolfe nodded, and we left it for Kramer. As if it were an insect. The metaphor thickens. "I thought you didn't like metaphors before lunch." "Today," he said, "I make exceptions." He drew back, nostrils twitching faintly. "Lavender," he observed, "a fragrance that has become oppressive." "That makes 3 appearances," I said. "Either we're haunted by Mrs. Fane or by her laundry." "Neither," he said. "We are haunted by whatever she fears." Before I could reply, the bell rang. Not the elevator this time, the front door. Fritz jumped like a startled heron. I nodded. "Don't worry, I'll get it. You've done enough for one morning." The door opened on Inspector Kramer, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon and didn't have the decency to spit it out. His cigar was unlit for once, a bad sign. "Goodwin," he barked, brushing past me. "Where's Wolfe?" "In the office," I said. "But if you're here about a parking ticket, we're paid up." "Don't start," he growled. Then he saw the elevator. "Good God." "Yeah," I said. "That's what Fritz said, only in Swiss." He stomped toward it, scowling. "Who is he?" "Still working on that," I said. "He brought his own mystery, but forgot his name tag." Wolfe's voice, cool as glacier water, carried from the doorway. "Inspector, I assume your appearance is not coincidental." Kramer turned, jaw tightening. "You've got a corpse in your elevator, Wolfe. That makes this my business." "Your business," Wolfe said evenly, "is crime. My elevator is merely unfortunate architecture." "Don't get cute," Kramer said. "Until I know how he got here, this whole house is a crime scene." Wolfe drew himself up, a mountain preparing to lecture an ant. "My house, Inspector, is not a crime scene. It is a crucible, and if you interfere with its equilibrium, you may spoil the reaction." "Reaction hell," Kramer snapped. "A man's dead." "Indeed," Wolfe said softly. "And that, I assure you, offends me more than it does you. Death under my roof is an intrusion." "You can write me a poem later," Kramer said. "Right now I'm calling the coroner." He signaled to the uniform at the door, and in 10 minutes the brownstone was crawling with police like ants at a picnic. Wolfe stood by his desk, glaring at the activity as though it violated the Geneva Conventions. I stayed by the elevator, giving statements and trying not to smirk at the idea of anyone ordering Wolfe out of his own chair. Stebbins showed up, chewing gum and suspicion in equal measure. "Well, Goodwin," he said, "you finally got tired of regular clients, huh? Had to import one?" "Sure," I said. "First corpse delivery's free, after that we charge rent." He grunted, crouching to inspect the body. "No ID, no wallet. Guy's shoes cost more than my week's pay." "That's because you need a raise," I told him. Kramer appeared again, hat off, hair damp from the drizzle outside. "We've traced the uniform," he said grimly. "Belongs to the Fane household. Chauffeur's name's Larrabee." I whistled. Small world. He chauffeured his way into our elevator. Wolfe's voice turned crisp. "How does a man employed by Mrs. "We've already spoken to the police." "I'm not the police," I said, "which is why you still look comfortable." Julian Fane gestured toward the empty chair opposite him, smile smooth and rehearsed. "Please, if Mr. Wolfe is interested, we're happy to assist, within reason." I sat down. The waiter appeared with silent efficiency. Fane ordered another round of scotch. Knox declined with the moral fervour of a man protecting his ulcers. "I gather," I said, "that Mr. Maddox was here the night before he died." Fane nodded. "He dined with a client, briefly. I saw him at the bar around 9. After that, well, you've read the papers." "Who was the client?" "An estate matter. Confidential." Knox frowned. Arlen was under pressure. He'd been agitated, talking about some old case revived from the war years, Ridiculous nonsense. Something called Project Lantern? I asked. They both stiffened, not quite simultaneously, but close enough to make music. Knox's hand tightened on his empty glass. Where did you hear that? Let's say it drifted through a telephone line, I told him, and maybe you can tell me what it means. Nothing, he said too quickly. It was an old army audit, classified and forgotten. Fane leaned back, crossing his legs. Archie? May I call you Archie? This all sounds terribly melodramatic. Arlen had a flair for tragedy. He might have invented something to make his work feel significant. People don't usually invent poison in their coffee for the same reason, I said, and you might want to check your bartender before he invents anything else. Because while Fane was talking, I'd noticed the man behind the bar. Dark hair, pale face, hands fidgeting like sparrows. When he thought no one was looking, he tucked something lavender-coloured into his apron pocket. I excused myself with a smile and drifted over. The bartender froze when I asked for a ginger ale. He poured it like he was diffusing a bomb. Nice place you've got here, I said. Quiet. The kind of joint where people could discuss international secrets and no one would blink. He swallowed. I just pour drinks, mister. That's civic-minded of you. But tell me, was Mr. Maddox here last night with a woman? His Adam's apple jumped. Maybe. I didn't catch names. Describe her. Tall, gloves. Smelled like lavender. Popular scent this season, I said. Did she say anything interesting before she left? He hesitated. Something about the code still existing. I didn't understand. Neither did I, but I pretended to. And the napkin she burned. He blinked. How? She didn't get it all. Half a corner was left. I leaned forward. What was on it? He shrugged helplessly. Just a word. Gresham. That name again. I slipped him a 10, which seemed to calm his nerves, though not his conscience. Back at the table, Fane and Knox were pretending to talk golf. I thanked them for their cooperation, which they hadn't offered, and took my leave. As I crossed the lobby, I glanced back. The bartender was gone. So was the lavender handkerchief. By the time I got back to West 35th Street, Manhattan had turned silver in the evening drizzle. I hung up my coat and found Wolfe in the dining room performing his usual autopsy on a trout with almonds. Fritz stood by with a look of priestly solemnity that matched the occasion. Wolfe raised his eyes as I entered. You are late. I had to earn my keep. The Irie Club's not exactly a cabaret. It's where rich men go to practice looking bored. He motioned to Fritz. Beer for Mr. Goodwin. He will require fortification to endure his own report. I sat and started. The two surviving partners were there, Knox and Fane. Knox brittle as stale bread, Fane smooth as syrup. They both played dumb about Project Lantern. A bartender, who may or may not survive the week, mentioned Maddox meeting a woman there last night. Tall, gloves, lavender perfume. Said she talked about a code still existing. Oh, and she tried to burn a napkin with the word Gresham on it. Wolfe paused mid-bite. Gresham, he repeated. You are certain? Unless the bartender has poetic spelling. He put down his fork. Then the past has indeed been exhumed. I leaned back, crossing my legs. That's exactly what I was thinking, right after wondering whether I could expense the ginger ale. He ignored that. Colonel Gresham, deceased 1919, was connected to intelligence operations involving coded transmissions. If Maddox reopened the file under that name, we are not merely examining inheritance law. Then what are we examining? He dabbed his lips delicately. We are trespassing upon a ghost of statecraft. That phrase had the full Wolfe flavour, rich, over-seasoned, and begging for parody. I gave him one. We are trespassing upon a ghost of statecraft, I intoned, using my best imitation of his bass thunder. Next week on the wireless, Nero Wolfe versus the Spirit Bureau of War. His eyes slid toward me, glacial and offended. Goodwin, restrain yourself before I do. I grinned. Just rehearsing your radio debut. He sighed through his nose, which in Wolfian language meant mild affection wrapped in irritation. Archie, if you ever develop discipline, I shall lose a capable assistant and gain a corpse. Fritz reappeared with the beer, placing it beside me. Wolfe reached for his own glass and regarded me over the rim. Did you observe anything else of value? The value's still pending appraisal, but the bartender pocketed a lavender handkerchief. If it's not coincidence, it's choreography. Retrieve it, Wolfe ordered. Too late. He and the handkerchief both evaporated. He nodded slowly, considering. That too is instructive. It suggests fear or guilt. Or laundry day. His lips twitched barely. Pfui, when you jest, the orchids wilt. That's unfair. They haven't even heard me. At that moment, the phone rang, slicing through the cozy aroma of trout and almonds. I picked it up. Goodwin. A pause, then Kramer's gravelly voice. Tell Wolfe early editions are calling Maddox's death suicide. You and your boss might want to stay clear till I sort the facts. Inspector, we'll hold the presses. You do that. Click. I relayed the message. Wolfe made a noise somewhere between a hum and a growl. Suicide. How convenient for everyone but the truth. He pushed his plate away and reached for the small silver box of toothpicks, a signal the meal was over and the evening's work about to begin. Archie, he said, we are being invited, by ignorance, by fear, and by $5,000, to disturb ghosts best left untroubled. Then we'd better bring a flashlight. He gave me the faintest of smiles. Indeed, and a net, for men, not spirits. Fritz cleared the table silently, and the office light glowed across the parquet as Wolfe heaved himself up and lumbered toward his desk. Outside, rain whispered against the windows, as if Manhattan were listening in. I followed him, ready to type the next memo. Another night, another murder, another ghost, and a detective who hated to move but never missed a target once he'd settled his aim. If you've ever seen Inspector Kramer coming up the brownstone steps, you know there are two kinds of weather that can make the day go bad fast. Thunderstorms and Kramer in a hurry. That morning, we had both. The storm was spitting on West 35th like it owed the city money, and Kramer looked like he'd wrestled it on the way over. His hat was dripping, his coat sagged like it had been wrung out, and his cigar was clenched at the angle of a man who'd rather be chewing suspects. Fritz ushered him in with a look suggesting that Swiss neutrality did not extend to muddy footprints. Wolfe was in the office, post-orchid, pre-lunch, which means a man took his life in his hands, interrupting him. The orchids had been misted, the Times was folded neatly, and Wolfe's massive presence behind the desk resembled a patient mountain reluctantly tolerating climbers. Kramer stomped in without ceremony. All right, Wolfe, he growled. You can guess why I'm here. I could, Wolfe said, voice lazy as syrup, but that would deprive you of the pleasure of explaining. Kramer puffed on the cigar, producing enough smoke to qualify as weather in itself. Your phone number showed up on Arlen Maddox's call sheet, 5 minutes before he dropped dead. I'd like to know why. Wolfe didn't blink. Because a man chose to die in mid-conversation. That landed like a riddle tossed into a well. Kramer scowled. You mean he called you? I mean precisely what I said, Wolfe replied. He called, spoke a phrase of negligible clarity, and perished thereafter. That is not, I trust, a felony on my part. Kramer's eyes narrowed. He said something, huh? What? Wolfe glanced toward me. I shrugged. The late Mr. Maddox used the line, "Tell him it's begun again," and hung up. We were still trying to figure out what had begun when you started knocking on the front door. Cute, Kramer said, lighting a fresh cigar with the stub of the last one. But what exactly does that mean? If I knew, I said, I'd start charging tuition. Kramer shot me a look that suggested he'd prefer to charge me with obstruction. You think this is a joke, Goodwin? Not at all, Inspector. I just haven't learned to take death personally. It's bad for morale. He ignored that, turning back to Wolfe. You two had nothing to do with Maddox, no business with his firm? Wolfe leaned back, making the chair complain. Inspector, I rarely do business with attorneys. They tend to overvalue words and undervalue silence. That's rich, Kramer said. You talking about valuing silence. Wolfe's eyes twinkled faintly. Touché. Now that you have unburdened your curiosity, may I assume you have actual information to impart? Kramer grunted. All right, since you asked so polite. Maddox's office safe was cleaned out last night. Not cash, files. One folder missing, Project Lantern. Army Intelligence 1919 classified. Maddox got it reopened 6 weeks ago. At that, Wolfe's eyebrows went up a fraction, which in his case is the equivalent of a standing ovation. Fascinating, he murmured. I said, sounds like a war story that forgot to die. Keep your wisecracks, Kramer snapped. The file had signatures and codes older than either of us. Whoever took it knew exactly what they wanted. Perhaps they wanted to prevent its misuse, Wolfe suggested. Or cover their own trail, Kramer shot back. You think this Project Lantern connects to Maddox's death? I think, Wolfe said mildly, that your intuition, while unrefined, is not misplaced, Kramer growled. Cut the embroidery. You've got something, don't you? Wolfe steepled his fingers. Inspector, if I possessed something, I would not share it prematurely. You are a man of procedure. I am a man of synthesis. We shall each perform our function. That function, Kramer said, usually ends with me cleaning up your mess. An arrangement that has suited us both, has it not? That stopped him for half a second. Then he sighed through his nose, smoke curling around his head like an aura of civic irritation. One day, Wolfe, you're going to stretch that fat neck past the law. Wolfe's smile was faint and cold. Inspector, I assure you, the law is elastic enough. Kramer muttered something about ulcers. I gave him a sympathetic grin. If it helps, I'm taking applications for pallbearers when he finally stretches it. Keep it up, Goodwin, and you'll get a head start, Kramer said without heat. The storm outside punctuated the silence with thunder. Fritz appeared discreetly at the doorway, eyes flicking from Kramer to Wolfe. Lunch in 10 minutes, gentlemen. Very good, Wolfe said. I trust the trout survived the morning. Perfectly, sir, Kramer gave a low chuckle. Only you talk about fish while a man's dead. Inspector, Wolfe said smoothly, man's mortality is the commonest fact in nature. It need not interrupt digestion. Kramer rubbed his temple. You drive me crazy. On the contrary, Wolfe replied, I keep you sane by giving you an outlet for indignation. He could have charged rent for the silence that followed. Finally, Kramer reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph in a manila envelope. He slid it across the desk. Here, you tell me what to make of that. I leaned forward. The photo showed Maddox standing beside a uniformed officer, broad-shouldered, sharp-featured, eyes squinting against sunlight that had gone out decades ago. Scrawled at the bottom in fading ink was the name Gresham. Colonel Gresham, Kramer said, officially died in France 1919, but I've got a problem. His name popped up last year on a bank document in New York. Signature verified. I whistled. He must have found a good embalmer. Or a good forger, Kramer said. Either way, Maddox had that file. Now it's gone. Wolfe studied the photo a long time, expression unreadable. His fingers tapped once on the desk, then stopped. Inspector, do you retain possession of the negative? It's evidence you're not getting it. Then you may keep your negative, Wolfe said, voice mild as cream. The positive will suffice. Kramer grunted. You don't fool me. You're already 3 moves ahead. Just don't get in my way this time. I would never presume to obstruct, Wolfe said, though I confess your investigations sometimes arrive where I've already been. That's one way to put it. He turned to me. Goodwin, if he starts meddling, you let me know. I spread my hands. Sure, Inspector. The moment I see him sprinting toward a crime scene, I'll call headquarters. That got a short, reluctant laugh. The storm had softened him a little. All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report, whatever the devil it'll be. Just don't make me read about it first in the Gazette. Mr. Cohen, Wolfe said, publishes what interests him. I do not control his taste. Kramer grunted again, stuffed the cigar between his teeth and headed for the door. Just before he left, he paused and turned back. The anger had drained out of him. What remained was bone-deep fatigue. He dropped the photograph on Wolfe's desk. That man, he said quietly, nodding to the image of Gresham, died once before. Then he left. For a moment, only the rain spoke. Wolfe stared at the photograph, unmoving. The clock ticked, the city outside breathed through the downpour, and I could almost hear the past waking up in the walls. Finally, Wolfe murmured, almost to himself, So it has indeed begun again. That gave me a small chill, though I'd seen him stare down worse. If you don't mind my saying so, I said, that sounds like Act 2 of a bad ghost story. He didn't look up. It is worse than that, Archie. It is history. I leaned on the edge of the desk. Well, if history's repeating, maybe this time it'll pay our bill. He glanced at me then, one eyebrow lifting. You are frivolous. I'm alive, I said. It's a nasty habit I intend to keep. He exhaled through his nose, almost like a sigh of approval. Good, then attend to it. Summon Mr. Panzer for the morning. We shall require eyes beyond our walls. Got it, I said. And Kramer? He will do as conscience dictates. It is, after all, his vocation. Wolfe turned the photo toward the light. For the first time that day, the faintest crack in his composure showed. Something private, uneasy. Colonel Gresham, he murmured again, a name too long buried to stay forgotten. The office felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier, the hum of the storm outside like a pulse. I watched him staring into the sepia face of a man who shouldn't exist anymore, and wondered just how many ghosts were about to come calling. "Archie," he said softly, eyes still on the photo, "have Fritz prepare the dining room. Lunch must not be late." I almost laughed. Of course, nothing like a hot meal to fortify against restless spirits. He didn't answer, only reached for the bell cord with deliberate grace, summoning Fritz and closing the subject. By the time the Swiss appeared, towel in hand and dignity restored, the great detective's face had settled back into its usual marble serenity. But as I left the office to wash up, I could still feel his words lingering in the air, quiet, precise, and heavy as a verdict. So it has indeed begun again. And for once, I didn't have a wisecrack ready. When Saul Panzer calls before noon, it usually means someone else's secret just got shorter. That morning, the message he left on the wire was simple. "Got your ghost, Archie. Meet me at the corner of 43rd and Madison." I told Wolfe and got the expected grunt, approval disguised as indigestion, and 10 minutes later I was out the door with my hat, my notebook, and the faint hope that Saul hadn't decided to go patriotic on me. The corner of 43rd was doing its usual impression of an anthill, but Saul Panzer could make himself invisible in a phone booth. He was leaning against a lamppost, hat brim low, raincoat collar higher, the picture of unnoticeable efficiency. He nodded once and started walking. I fell in beside him. "Found something?" I asked. "Maybe someone," he said. "That photo Wolfe showed you, the guy next to Maddox. I got a match." "Hit me." "Colonel Edward Gresham, Army Intelligence, died in 1919, officially. His files locked tighter than a drum, cause of death listed as code breach European theatre. But 2 months ago, somebody used his name to open a trust account at 5th Federal. "Using a dead man's signature," I said. "That's one way to skip taxes." Saul's mouth twitched. "Gresham Trust, Midtown Branch. No public listing, but I've been watching it. A woman goes in every Wednesday around noon. Pale, dark hair, expensive coat. Never stays more than 10 minutes. "Could be the secretary," I said. "Could be the ghost." "Could be neither," Saul said. "But she dropped something yesterday. Lavender sachet, faint perfume. Same as the one you mentioned from the brownstone. That name again, Lavender, following the story like a calling card." "All right," I said. "We'll pay our respects to the Gresham Trust." The building looked respectable enough to hold other people's money and its own sins. Brass letters on the door said, "Gresham Trust Company, Private Holdings Division." The lobby smelled of disinfectant and discretion. Behind a glass partition, 2 secretaries typed in perfect synchrony, and 1 guard polished his revolver with the same devotion Fritz reserves for cutlery. Saul and I parked ourselves in the cafe across the street, where the coffee was strong enough to dissolve alibis. From the window we had a clear view of the front door. At 12:03, punctual as doom, she appeared, a woman in dove grey with a hat like an inverted teacup and gloves the colour of surrender. She moved with precision, like someone measuring her own footsteps. "That her?" I asked. Saul nodded once. "That's the one." She went inside. 10 minutes later, she came out again, lighter by 1 envelope and 1 expression of anxiety. "Want to tail her?" I said. "She's too clean," Saul said. "No nervous glances, no wasted motion. You'll spook her before she turns the corner." "Fine," I said. "Then we see what she left behind." We waited another 5 minutes, then crossed the street. The guard inside gave me the kind of look that made me wish I'd worn a monocle. "Yes, sir," he said. "Good afternoon," I told him. "I'm from Consolidated Underwriters. We insure commercial property against, among other calamities, espionage. Would you mind if I had a word with your manager?" That phrase works wonders when delivered with confidence and a decent hat. Within moments we were escorted upstairs to a frosted glass door labelled Private Records, authorised only. The office beyond was quiet except for the soft hum of a shredder and the kind of perfume that travels faster than gossip.